The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Emma's childhood home, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors she'd played on as a child. She sat cross-legged in the attic, surrounded by cardboard boxes that smelled of cedar and decades past, carefully unwrapping tissue paper from around her grandmother's china. This house, the one where she'd spent every summer, every holiday, every significant moment of her youth, was being prepared for sale. Her phone buzzed on the dusty floor beside her, a text from her mother. "How's the packing going? Don't forget Grandpa's things need to go to Meadowbrook by Friday." Emma's chest tightened at the mention of Meadowbrook Senior Living. 3 months ago, after Grandpa Joseph had his second fall and could no longer safely live alone, the family had made the difficult decision to move him into the facility. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he regained his strength, but somehow temporary had stretched on, and the house that had always waited for his return was now being emptied. She picked up a framed photograph from one of the boxes. Herself at 7 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, perched on Grandpa Joseph's shoulders at the beach. He was looking up at her with such pure joy, his weathered hands gripping her ankles securely. She remembered that day. He'd taught her to look for sand dollars, told her stories about his time in the Navy, bought her mint chocolate chip ice cream even though Grandma said it would spoil her dinner. "Miss you, Grandpa," she whispered to the photograph. The truth was, she'd been so consumed with her new job at the marketing firm downtown, her crumbling relationship with Derek, and the general chaos of being 26 and feeling like she was failing at adulthood that she hadn't visited Meadowbrook in 3 weeks. 3 weeks since she'd seen the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd slipped her $20 bills with a conspiratorial wink, who'd told her she could be anything she wanted to be. Guilt gnawed at her stomach. Tomorrow, she promised herself, tomorrow she'd visit. The next afternoon, Emma pulled into the Meadowbrook Senior Living parking lot, a cheerful brick building with manicured lawns and a sign promising compassionate care for your loved ones. She'd brought Grandpa Joseph's favorite cookies, oatmeal raisin from the bakery on 5th Street, and wore the cardigan he'd given her last Christmas. The blue one, he said, matched her eyes. The lobby was pleasant enough. Soft music playing, a reception desk with a woman typing on a computer, motivational posters about living your golden years to the fullest. But as Emma signed in and made her way down the corridor toward her grandfather's room, something felt off. The hallway was too quiet. No laughter, no conversation, just the distant beep of machines and the shuffle of staff members moving efficiently from room to room, their faces professionally pleasant but detached. Room 47. Emma knocked softly before pushing the door open. "Grandpa? It's Emma. I brought..." The words died in her throat. Grandpa Joseph sat in a wheelchair by the window, but he wasn't the grandfather she remembered. His cardigan, the same one he'd worn for 20 years, the one Grandma had knit, was buttoned wrong, one side higher than the other. His hair, usually neatly combed, stuck up at odd angles. But worst of all was his expression, vacant, staring out at the parking lot with eyes that seemed to look at nothing. "Grandpa!" Emma's voice cracked as she approached. She knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his hand. It felt cold, papery. "It's me. It's Emma." For a long moment, nothing. Then, slowly, his eyes focused on her face. Recognition flickered, and something that might have been relief. "Emma girl," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "You came." "Of course I came. I'm sorry it's been so long. Work has been crazy and..." She stopped, the excuses feeling hollow. "I brought your favorite cookies." He smiled then, a shadow of his old warmth. "That's my girl. Always thinking of your old grandpa." But as they talked, or rather, as Emma talked and he listened with that distant look returning to his eyes, she began to notice things. The water glass on his bedside table was empty, a ring of dust around its base suggesting it had been empty for a while. His lunch tray sat untouched on the rolling table, the food congealed and cold. The TV remote was on the floor, well out of reach. "Grandpa, have you had lunch?" Emma asked, picking up the tray. He looked at it as if seeing it for the first time. I don't remember. Maybe. The food here isn't like your grandma's cooking." His voice grew softer. "I miss her cooking. I miss her." Emma's throat tightened. Grandma had passed 2 years ago, and Grandpa Joseph still spoke about her in the present tense sometimes. as if she'd just stepped out to the store. "Have the nurses been checking on you? Do they help you with meals?" He shrugged, a gesture of defeat. "They're busy. Lots of people here need help. I don't want to be a bother." "You're not a bother, Grandpa. That's what they're here for." But as she looked around the sterile room, the bare walls, the absence of any personal touches except the few family photos she brought on her last visit, the way the curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun, a cold realization settled over her. Her grandfather wasn't just living here, he was being stored here, warehoused with other elderly people who'd become inconvenient to their families, their lives. Emma stayed for 2 hours, far longer than she'd planned. She filled his water glass, warmed up his lunch in the microwave down the hall, helped him eat when his hands shook too much to hold the spoon steady. She combed his hair, fixed his cardigan buttons, found the TV remote and put it within reach. As she did these simple tasks, she became aware of sounds from other rooms. An elderly woman calling, "Hello? Hello?" over and over, her voice growing more desperate with each repetition. A man yelling for someone named Margaret. The constant beeping of call buttons that seemed to go unanswered for long stretches. When Emma finally left, promising to return soon, she found herself walking slowly back down that too-quiet corridor. Without quite knowing why, she began looking into the open doorways she passed. Room 43, an elderly man asleep in his chair, mouth open, a bib still around his neck from what might have been breakfast or lunch, dried food crusted on the edges. Room 45, an empty room, but she could see the bed was unmade, the sheets tangled, and there was a smell she didn't want to identify. Room 49, a tiny woman in a floral nightgown, sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. No TV on, no book, no activity, just sitting. Emma's steps slowed as she reached the common room, a large space with couches, a television, and tables for activities. A handful of residents sat scattered around the room, but no one was talking. No one was engaging. The TV played to an empty couch. A hand-finished puzzle sat abandoned on a table, pieces scattered as if whoever had been working on it had simply given up. An elderly woman in a wheelchair near the door caught Emma's eye. She was meticulously dressed, lipstick applied, pearls around her neck. Her white hair styled carefully. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the entrance as if waiting for someone. On impulse, Emma approached her. "Hello, that's a beautiful necklace." The woman's face transformed, years of loneliness evaporating in an instant. Oh, thank you, dear. They were my mother's. I wear them every day." Her voice shook slightly. "I'm waiting for my daughter. She said she'd visit today." Emma glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 4 p.m. Visiting hours would be ending soon. "I'm sure she'll be here soon," Emma said softly, though something in the woman's eyes suggested she'd been waiting a long time, maybe not just today. "She's very busy, you know. She has children, a career, I understand." The woman's smile was brave but brittle. "But she promised she'd come today. It's my birthday, you see." Emma's heart cracked. "Happy birthday, that's wonderful." 87 years old. The woman's eyes grew distant. "I used to have parties. Big ones. My husband would make his famous punch, and we'd dance in the living room. That was before here." They talked for a few more minutes about the woman's husband, deceased for 12 years, her daughter, who visited once a month if Emma read between the lines correctly, her former career as a librarian. When Emma finally had to leave, the woman squeezed her hand. "Thank you for stopping to talk. Most people just walk by. It's like being invisible, you know, like becoming a ghost in your own life." Emma walked to her car in a daze, those words echoing in her mind. Like becoming a ghost in your own life? She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, not starting the engine, just staring at the cheerful brick building with its promise of compassionate care. Inside were dozens of people who had lived full lives, raised families, built careers, fought wars, fell in love, experienced joy and heartbreak, now sitting alone in rooms, waiting for someone to remember they existed. Her grandfather, with his unbuttoned cardigan and cold lunch. The woman calling, "Hello? Hello?" into an empty hallway. The man searching for Margaret. The woman waiting for her daughter on her 87th birthday. All of them invisible, all of them ghosts. Emma pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she knew she had to do something. She couldn't walk away from what she'd seen. She couldn't let her grandfather, couldn't let any of them, spend their final years forgotten. She typed, "Things I noticed at Meadowbrook," and began to list everything, her fingers flying over the keyboard as tears she'd been holding back finally fell. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Grandpa Joseph's face, that moment when he'd recognized her, the relief and joy that had flooded his features, as if she'd rescued him from drowning. How long had he been sitting there before she arrived? How many days had he stared out that window, waiting for someone, anyone, to visit? And the others. The birthday woman still waiting for her daughter. Had anyone brought her a cake? Sung to her? Acknowledged that she'd survived 87 years on this earth? Emma sat up, turned on her bedside lamp, and grabbed her laptop. She began searching nursing home neglect, elderly loneliness, senior care statistics. What she found made her stomach turn. Study after study showed that loneliness in elderly populations was an epidemic. One article called it the silent crisis. Another reported that social isolation among seniors was as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Residents in nursing homes were particularly vulnerable. Many received fewer than one visit per month from family members. Some received no visits at all. Emma clicked on a video, a news report about a nursing home in Oregon where a volunteer program had been started. Volunteers would visit residents who had no family, spending time talking, reading, playing games. The transformation in the residents was remarkable. One woman who'd been nearly catatonic began laughing again, sharing stories about her youth. A man who'd refused to leave his room started attending activities. The reporter's words stuck with Emma. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who cares, one person who sees them, one person who says, "You matter, you're not forgotten." Emma closed her laptop slowly, an idea beginning to form in her mind. It was crazy. It was probably impossible, but she couldn't shake it. What if she wrote her grandfather a letter? A real handwritten letter that he could hold, reread, keep by his bedside. Something tangible that said, "I see you. You matter. You're not forgotten." And what about the others? The birthday woman, the man calling for Margaret, the tiny woman staring at the wall. What if they each received a letter too? Emma glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. She should sleep. She had work tomorrow, a presentation she needed to prepare for. But instead, she got out of bed, went to her desk, and pulled out a box of stationery her mother had given her last Christmas. Pretty cards with watercolor flowers that Emma had never found occasion to use. She sat down, uncapped a pen, and began to write. "Dear Grandpa Joseph, I left your room today with a heart so full of love and so heavy with regret. I'm sorry I haven't visited more. I'm sorry I let weeks slip by while I was busy with work, with life, with things that seemed important but pale in comparison to time with you. I want you to know that I remember everything you taught me. I remember how you showed me that the best treasures at the beach aren't shells. They're the moments we spend looking for them together. I remember how you taught me to ride a bike, running behind me even when I know your knees hurt, refusing to let go until you were sure I was ready. I remember your stories about Grandma, about your time in the Navy, about the life you built with your hands and your heart. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are Joseph Chen, husband, father, grandfather, friend, veteran, builder of houses, and teller of stories. You are the man who taught me that kindness costs nothing but means everything. I will visit again soon, but until then, please keep this letter close. Whenever you feel alone, read it and know. Somewhere in this world, someone is thinking of you, grateful for you, holding you in their heart. With all my love, your Emma girl." Emma's hand shook slightly as she signed her name. Tears had fallen on the paper, smudging the ink in places, but she didn't rewrite it. The imperfection felt honest. She placed the letter in an envelope, wrote her grandfather's name on it, and set it aside. Then, before she could overthink it, she pulled out another card. This one was for the birthday woman. She didn't know her name, so she wrote "To the Lady in Pearls" on the envelope. Inside, she wrote, "Dear friend, yesterday was your birthday, your 87th birthday. And even though we only spoke for a few minutes, I want you to know that I'm so grateful you've been on this earth for 87 years. The world is better because you're in it. You told me about your husband's famous punch and dancing in your living room. That's beautiful. That's a life well lived. That's love that lasts beyond death. Your daughter is lucky to have a mother with such wonderful memories to share. I hope your birthday was special. If it wasn't, if she didn't make it, if no one brought you cake, if you spent it alone, please know that it still matters. You still matter. 87 years of existence, of experience, of survival, of love. That's extraordinary. Happy birthday! May your 88th year bring you moments of joy, memories of love, and the comfort of knowing you are seen. With warmth, a friend who noticed your beautiful pearls." Emma addressed that envelope too, then pulled out a third card, and a fourth, and a fifth. She wrote to the man who called for Margaret, telling him that his love for her was clear in his voice, that someone that devoted was someone special. She wrote to the tiny woman staring at the wall, telling her that even in silence, she had presence and dignity. She wrote to the man with the bib still around his neck, telling him that she hoped someone made him laugh today, that he deserved gentleness and respect. By the time dawnlight began filtering through her curtains, Emma had written 15 letters. Her hand cramped, her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She looked at the stack of envelopes on her desk. It wasn't much. It wouldn't solve the systemic problems at Meadowbrook. It wouldn't change the fact that these people needed more staff, better care, actual human connection. But it was something. It was 15 moments of being seen, 15 instances of someone saying, "You matter, you're not forgotten." Emma took a photo of the letters, stacked neatly with her cup of tea beside them. Without overthinking it, she posted it to her Instagram, a platform she usually used for carefully curated photos of brunches and sunsets, with a caption, "Visited my grandpa at his nursing home yesterday and my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. So many beautiful souls sitting alone, waiting for someone to remember they're there. So tonight, I wrote letters. To my grandpa, to the woman waiting for her daughter on her birthday, to the man calling for his lost love, to strangers who deserve to know they're not invisible. It's not much, but maybe it's something. If you have an elderly family member or friend in a care facility, maybe consider writing them a letter this week. Let them hold something tangible that says, I see you, you matter, you're loved." Hashtag the nursing home letters, hashtag note invisible, hashtag older care, hashtag compassion. She hit post and immediately felt silly. Her 342 Instagram followers were mostly college friends and coworkers. Nobody would care about her late-night letter-writing session. Emma set her phone aside, finally crawled into bed, and fell into an exhausted sleep. When Emma woke up 5 hours later, groggy and running late for work, her phone was exploding with notifications. Her Instagram post had 247 likes and 89 comments, and they were still coming. This made me cry. My grandmother is in a nursing home, and I haven't visited in months. Thank you for the reminder. I work at a senior care facility, and you have no idea how much a simple letter means to these residents. Bless you. I'm going to write letters to my uncle this week. He's been so lonely since my aunt passed. Is there a way to send letters to residents who don't have family? I'd love to write to someone. That last comment made Emma pause. She read it again, then scrolled through the others. Multiple people were asking the same thing. Could they write letters to residents at Meadowbrook who didn't get visitors? Could Emma coordinate something? Emma stared at her phone, her mind racing. Could she? Should she? She thought about the woman in pearls, waiting, the man calling for Margaret, her grandfather with his cold lunch and unbuttoned cardigan. Before she could overthink it, Emma commented back, "Let me talk to the facility and see if this is something we can organize. I'll update everyone soon. Red heart." She screenshotted the post and sent it to her mother with a text. Mom, I need the contact info for whoever's in charge at Meadowbrook. I have an idea. Getting Meadowbrook to approve her idea proved harder than Emma anticipated. The director, Mrs. Patricia Whitmore, was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone. When Emma called to explain her plan, the response was immediate and dismissive. Miss Chen, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, we have protocols, privacy concerns. We can't just allow random people to send correspondence to our residents. But these wouldn't be random people, Emma argued, pacing her apartment with the phone pressed to her ear. They'd be volunteers who genuinely want to brighten someone's day, and I'd screen every letter before it was delivered to make sure they're appropriate. Screen them. Do you have any idea how time-consuming that would be? And what credentials do you have to make those judgments? Emma bit back her frustration. Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, I was at Meadowbrook 2 days ago. I saw residents sitting alone for hours. My grandfather's lunch was cold and untouched. There was a woman waiting for her daughter on her birthday. I'm not going to discuss other residents' private matters with you, Mrs. Whitmore cut in, her voice ice cold. Your grandfather's care is being handled according to our standards. If you have specific concerns about his treatment, you're welcome to file a formal complaint. But this letter scheme, it's not a scheme, it's compassion. It's liability. What if someone writes something inappropriate? What if a resident becomes distressed? What if families complain that strangers are contacting their loved ones? Mrs. Whitmore sighed, the sound heavy with long-suffering patience. Look, I understand you're upset about your grandfather. Families often struggle with the transition to residential care, but Meadowbrook provides excellent services within our means and resources. We have activity coordinators, nutritious meal plans, and qualified nursing staff. Your letters, while well-intentioned, are unnecessary and potentially problematic. Emma felt tears of frustration building. They're not unnecessary. These people are lonely. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. Have a good day, Ms. Chen. The line went dead. Emma stood in her apartment, phone still pressed to her ear, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. The dismissiveness in Mrs. Whitmore's voice echoed in her mind. Unnecessary, problematic, liability. Those weren't problems. Those were people. She looked at the stack of letters still sitting on her desk, waiting to be delivered. Her Instagram post had now reached nearly 3,000 likes, and her inbox was flooded with messages from people wanting to help, wanting to write, wanting to make a difference. And Mrs. Whitmore had just shut the door in their faces. Emma sank onto her couch, feeling defeated. Maybe this was a stupid idea. Maybe she was being naive, thinking that something as simple as letters could make a difference in the face of an overburdened, underfunded system. Her phone buzzed. A message from someone named at Sarah Wright-Shope. Hi, Emma. I saw your post about nursing home letters. I'm a retired teacher, and I've been wanting to volunteer but didn't know how. Please let me know if you organize something. I have so much time and so many stories to share. These elders deserve to be seen. Red heart. Emma read the message 3 times. These elders deserve to be seen. She thought about Grandpa Joseph, about the woman in pearls, about all the invisible ghosts. Mrs. Whitmore might have said no to Meadowbrook, but she hadn't said anything about other facilities. Emma opened her laptop and began searching for nursing homes in the area. There were 17 within a 30-mile radius. Surely one of them would be open to the idea. She started making calls. The first 3 facilities said no immediately. Similar concerns about privacy, liability, protocols. The 4th one, Sunrise Gardens, transferred her between 4 different people before she finally gave up. The 5th one, Golden Years Residence, let her get halfway through her pitch before interrupting to ask if she was selling something. By the time Emma reached the 6th facility on her list, Harmony Hills Extended Care, she was exhausted and ready to give up. She'd called during her lunch break at work, hiding in the stairwell because her cubicle offered no privacy. The phone rang 4 times. Emma was about to hang up when a warm voice answered. Harmony Hills, this is Margaret speaking. How can I brighten your day? The cheerful greeting caught Emma off guard. Oh, hello. My name is Emma Chen, and I have sort of an unusual request. I'm trying to organize a letter-writing program for nursing home residents who might not get many visitors, and I was wondering if... Hold on, sweetheart. Let me make sure I'm understanding correctly. Margaret's voice was kind, curious, rather than dismissive. You want to have people write letters to our residents? Yes. Encouraging letters, friendly letters, just something to let them know someone's thinking about them. I saw how lonely so many seniors are, and I thought maybe that's the most beautiful thing I've heard all month. Margaret's voice grew thick with emotion. Honey, can you hold on for just one moment? I need to grab our activities director. Her name's Nina, and I think she's going to want to hear this. Emma held, her heart beginning to race with something that felt like hope. A new voice came on the line, younger, energetic. Hi, this is Nina Patel. Margaret says you have an idea about letters for our residents? Emma launched into her explanation again, but this time it felt different. Nina wasn't interrupting with concerns about liability. She was asking questions. Good questions. Thoughtful questions. How would you match letter writers with residents? I was thinking based on interests, if possible. Like, if a volunteer mentioned they love gardening, maybe they'd be paired with a resident who used to garden. That way there's a connection point. And you'd screen the letters before delivery? Absolutely, every single one. I want to make sure they're appropriate and kind. Would this be ongoing, or just a one-time thing? Emma hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd like it to be ongoing, like pen pals, so residents have something to look forward to regularly. There was a pause. Then Nina said, Can you come to Harmony Hills tomorrow? I'd like to introduce you to some of our residents and our director. If we're going to do this, I want to do it right. Emma's eyes welled with tears. You're saying yes? I'm saying let's talk more. But between you and me? Nina's voice softened. We have residents here who light up when they get mail. Even junk mail. They're just happy someone thought to send them something. What you're proposing, it could be really special. Let's figure out how to make it work. Emma wanted to hug this woman she'd never met. Thank you. Thank you so much. I can come tomorrow during my lunch hour? Perfect. I'll see you at noon. And Emma, thank you for seeing them, for caring enough to do something. After they hung up, Emma sat in the stairwell for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. One yes. After all those no's, one yes. It was a start. Harmony Hills Extended Care was smaller than Meadowbrook, older, with worn carpet and furniture that had seen better days. But the moment Emma walked through the doors, she felt a difference. There was sound here, not the too quiet emptiness of Meadowbrook, but the gentle hum of life. A group of residents sat in the common area watching a game show, actually calling out answers. A woman in a wheelchair chatted with a staff member who was crouched down to her level, not rushing through the conversation. Someone was playing piano in another room, and Emma could hear residents singing along, some off-key but joyful. Nina met her at the reception desk, a petite woman in her early 30s, with kind eyes and paint stains on her cardigan. Emma, welcome to Harmony Hills. Come on, let me introduce you to some folks. They walked through the facility, and Nina shared the stories. There was Frank, 89, who'd been a jazz musician and had no family left. Ruth, 82, whose daughter lived in Australia and could only visit once a year. James, 76, whose son never responded to his calls. Elena, 94, who'd outlived all her friends and most of her family. Each one seemed almost pathetically grateful when Nina introduced Emma and explained the letter idea. You'd really write to me? Ruth asked, her voice trembling. A stranger would take time to write to me? Not just one stranger, Emma said gently. I have hundreds of people who want to write, people who care. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. I can't remember the last time I got a real letter. Not a bill or a form, but a real letter. Frank leaned forward in his wheelchair. You think anyone would want to hear about jazz? I played with some of the greats back in the day. Got stories that curl your hair. I think someone would love to hear those stories, Emma assured him. After meeting 6 residents, Nina took Emma to meet the director, Dr. Sandra Morrison, a woman in her 60s who looked exhausted but sincere. Nina tells me you want to organize letter writing for our residents, Dr. Morrison said, gesturing for Emma to sit. Walk me through exactly how you envision this working. Emma explained her plan. She'd create a simple website where volunteers could sign up, share a bit about themselves and their interests. She'd match them with residents based on compatibility. Letters would be sent to Emma first, she'd screen them, then forward them to Harmony Hills for distribution. And this would cost us nothing? Dr. Morrison asked. Nothing. I cover the costs myself. Website hosting, postage for forwarding letters, supplies. This isn't about money. It's about connection. Dr. Morrison studied her for a long moment. You know what the biggest problem in elder care is, Miss Chen? It's not funding, though that's a massive problem. It's not regulations or staffing shortages, though those are crushing us. It's that society has decided these people don't matter anymore. They've lived their lives, contributed their contributions, and now we warehouse them until they die. We're not even pretending anymore that their remaining years have value. Emma felt the truth of those words in her bones. My staff does their best, Dr. Morrison continued. But we're understaffed and overwhelmed. We can feed them, bathe them, give them their medications. But actually seeing them, recognizing them as individuals with rich histories and complex emotions, there aren't enough hours in the day. She leaned forward. So if you're offering to bring humanity back into their lives, even in this small way, then yes, God yes, let's do this. They worked out the details over the next hour. Nina would identify residents who'd benefit most from letters. Those without regular visitors, those showing signs of depression or withdrawal. Emma would create profiles for each one, listing their interests and a bit of their history. Volunteers would be able to browse the profiles and choose someone to write to. As Emma left Harmony Hills that afternoon, she felt energized in a way she hadn't in months. Maybe years. She had a purpose now, something that mattered. That evening, she created a simple website, thenursingHomeLetters.org. She posted the profiles of the 6 residents she'd met, along with instructions for volunteers. Then she updated her Instagram. Update. I found a facility willing to try this. Harmony Hills Extended Care has residents who'd love to receive letters. I've created a website where you can sign up to be a letter writer. Let's show these beautiful souls they're not forgotten. Link in bio. Red heart, hashtag the nursing home letters. She expected maybe a dozen signups that first night. By morning, she had 347 volunteers registered. And the number kept climbing. The letters began arriving at Emma's apartment in waves. At first, it was manageable, a dozen or so a day, which Emma could screen during her lunch breaks and evenings. She'd sit cross-legged on her floor, surrounded by envelopes, reading each one carefully. Most were beautiful, heartfelt messages from people who clearly understood the assignment. A teacher from Ohio writing to Frank about her love of jazz, asking him to share his stories. A gardener from Oregon writing to Ruth about Australian native plants, curious about Ruth's daughter's life there. A veteran writing to James, thanking him for his service, and sharing his own experiences. Emma would package them up every few days and mail them to Nina at Harmony Hills, including notes about which resident should receive which letter. Then Nina started sending her photos. Frank reading his letter with tears streaming down his face, his hands shaking as he held the paper. Ruth clutching her letter to her chest, beaming. James showing his letter to anyone who'd look, pride radiating from him. Nina's text accompanying the photos. Emma, you have no idea what you've started. Frank hasn't smiled like this in months. Ruth asked me to help her write a response. James wants to display his letters on his wall. They're transformed. Emma showed the photos to everyone, her co-workers, her mother, her friends. She posted them on Instagram, with permission, and each post garnered thousands of likes and hundreds of new volunteer sign-ups. Within 2 weeks, every resident at Harmony Hills had at least one letter writer. Some had multiple people writing to them. Then other facilities started calling. Riverside Senior Living saw the Instagram posts and reached out. Could Emma coordinate letters for their residents too? Oakmont Care Center called. Then Silverwood Village. Then Peaceful Meadows. Within a month, the nursing home letters had expanded to 8 facilities across 3 counties, with over 2,000 volunteers and 200 residents receiving regular mail. Emma was working her regular job during the day, then spending every evening and weekend coordinating the program. Her apartment was filled with letters, spreadsheets, resident profiles. Her friends joked that she'd become the postal service for the elderly. But she couldn't stop. Every time she thought about scaling back, she'd receive a message from a facility staff member about a resident who'd been withdrawn and depressed, who'd received their first letter, and suddenly started engaging again, started eating better, started wanting to live again. Or she'd get emails from volunteers. I started writing to Margaret at Riverside. She reminds me so much of my grandmother who passed last year. Writing to her is healing something in me I didn't know was broken. My 10-year-old daughter and I write letters together to Eleanor at Oakmont. It's teaching her about empathy and the value of elders. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm deployed overseas, and writing to William gives me a connection to home. His stories about World War II help me process what I'm experiencing now. The program was growing beyond anything Emma had imagined. It was beautiful and overwhelming and consuming her entire life. And she still hadn't been back to visit Grandpa Joseph. The guilt hit Emma like a physical blow one evening as she sat surrounded by letters, addressing envelopes to residents at 5 different facilities. She was spending hours each week coordinating care for strangers, grandparents, while her own grandfather sat at Meadowbrook, probably still alone, probably still forgotten. She grabbed her keys and drove to Meadowbrook without calling ahead, without planning. It was past dinner time, 7:30 p.m., later than she'd ever visited before. The evening shift at Meadowbrook had a different energy, fewer staff members, dimmer lighting, a sense of winding down. Emma signed in at the nearly empty reception desk and made her way to room 47. Grandpa Joseph was already in his pajamas, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, even though it was now dark outside and there was nothing to see but reflections. The TV was on, playing some sitcom neither of them would recognize, the laugh track echoing in the small room. "Grandpa?" Emma said softly from the doorway. He turned, and the transformation in his face nearly broke her. Pure joy mixed with something that looked like relief so profound it was almost painful. "Emma girl, you came back, I thought." His voice trailed off, but Emma knew what he'd thought, that she'd forgotten him, that her last visit had been exactly that, the last. "I'm so sorry I haven't been here," Emma said, rushing to his side and kneeling by his wheelchair. She took his hands. They were still cold, still papery, and that made her heart ache. "I've been working on something, and I lost track of time, but that's no excuse. I should have." "You're here now." He squeezed her hands with surprising strength. "That's what matters. Tell me what you've been working on that's kept you so busy." So Emma told him. About the letter she'd written that first night, about the Instagram post, about Harmony Hills and Nina, and the growing network of facilities and volunteers. She pulled out her phone and showed him photos. Residents holding their letters, smiling, crying happy tears. Grandpa Joseph studied each photo carefully, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's good work you're doing, Emma girl, important work." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the grandfather who'd always believed in her, who'd always seen her potential. "Your grandmother would be so proud. I'm proud." "But I've been neglecting you," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I've been so focused on helping strangers that I forgot to take care of you." "Strangers?" Grandpa Joseph shook his head slowly. "They're not strangers. They're people just like me. Sitting in rooms just like this one, waiting for someone to remember they're alive. You're giving them something precious, Emma. You're giving them proof that they still matter. You matter too, Grandpa." "I know, because you're here, because you came back." He smiled, that familiar warm smile that had been absent from his face for too long. "And because I know, even when you're not here, you're thinking of me. That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for Emma. She spent the next hour with him, really with him, not checking her phone, not thinking about the stack of letters waiting at home. She helped him get ready for bed, fluffed his pillows, made sure his water glass was full and within reach. She told him stories about work, about the apartment, about the volunteer from Japan who'd signed up to write letters. As she was getting ready to leave, Grandpa Joseph caught her hand. "Emma, would you do something for me?" "Anything." "Write me a letter, like you write to those folks at the other places. I want one too." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Of course, I'll write you one tonight." "No, I mean, I want to be part of your project. Match me with someone. A volunteer who doesn't know me, who doesn't feel obligated to write because we're family. I want to know what it feels like to open a letter from someone who chose to think about me." The request hit Emma hard. Her grandfather wanted what she'd been giving to strangers, the gift of being chosen, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll set up a profile for you, but I'm still going to visit, and write you my own letters too." "I'd like that." He squeezed her hand one more time. "You're doing something beautiful, Emma girl. Don't stop. But don't forget to live your own life either. Your grandmother always said the key to happiness was finding the thing you were meant to do and doing it with your whole heart. I think you found your thing." That night, Emma created a profile for Grandpa Joseph on the Nursing Home Letters website. Joseph Chen, 84. Location, Meadowbrook Senior Living. Interests, naval history, woodworking, classic cars, telling bad jokes, his granddaughter Emma. About, Joseph is a Navy veteran who served in the Pacific. He was married to his beloved wife Rose for 58 years until her passing 2 years ago. He has one daughter and one granddaughter who he loves fiercely. He built houses for 40 years, takes pride in work done with his own hands, and has never met a stranger. Only friends he hasn't talked to yet. He's been at Meadowbrook for 4 months and would love to hear from someone who appreciates a good story and doesn't mind if he repeats himself sometimes. Within an hour, Grandpa Joseph had 12 volunteers wanting to write to him. Emma chose an 82-year-old man named Walter from Vermont who'd written, "I was Navy too. Different war, same ocean. I'd be honored to swap stories with a fellow sailor. And I love bad jokes. The worse, the better." She sent Walter the address and sat back, imagining her grandfather's face when he received his first letter from his new pen pal. The following weeks brought changes Emma hadn't anticipated. The program continued growing. Now 15 facilities, 500 residents, nearly 4,000 volunteers. Emma had to create a team of volunteer coordinators just to keep up with the matching process and letter screening. But something else was happening too. Something bigger. The letters weren't just one way anymore. Residents were writing back. With help from facility staff, they were responding to their pen pals, and those responses were profound. Frank wrote to his volunteer, Maria the music teacher, about playing in jazz clubs in the 1950s, about the racism he'd faced as a black musician, about the joy of finding his sound. Maria shared his letters with her students, and they started learning about jazz history, about civil rights, about living history sitting in nursing homes. Ruth corresponded with her gardener pen pal, and they exchanged seeds and gardening tips across continents. Ruth started a small herb garden on her windowsill at Harmony Hills, the first time she'd shown interest in an activity in months. James wrote to his veteran pen pal about the war, about things he'd never told his family, about ghosts that had haunted him for 50 years. His pen pal understood in a way no one else could, and slowly, some of those ghosts began to fade. And Grandpa Joseph and Walter became fast friends through their letters. Walter's first letter arrived, and Grandpa Joseph insisted Emma read it to him 3 times. Then he dictated a response, making Emma write and rewrite until he got the joke just right. Nina from Harmony Hills started sending Emma regular updates. Frank asked if he could do a video call with Maria's class. Ruth wants to know if her pen pal would accept some herb seedlings. Emma, they're not just writing letters, they're building relationships, they're living again. The transformation wasn't limited to residents either. Volunteers were reporting back that writing the letters was changing them too. A college student wrote, "I started this to get volunteer hours for my resume. But writing to Eleanor has taught me more about resilience, grace, and living fully than any class ever has. She's 94 and has more wisdom in her pinky than I have in my whole body." A mother shared, "My teenage son has been glued to screens for years. But he agreed to write letters with me to Arthur at Riverside. Now he actually talks at dinner about what Arthur wrote. They bond over old cars. It's given us something to connect over again." Even Emma's own life was changing. The marketing job that had once seemed so important felt hollow now. She was good at it, great at it even. But sitting in meetings about consumer behavior and brand positioning felt increasingly meaningless when she could be coordinating something that actually mattered. One evening, her boss called her into his office. Emma braced for criticism. She knew her performance had slipped as she devoted more time to the nursing home letters. "Emma, I've been watching your work with this letter program," he said, gesturing to his computer screen where her Instagram was pulled up. It's gotten quite a bit of attention. I'm sorry if it's affected my work here. That's not what I'm saying. He leaned back in his chair. What you're doing. Connecting people, creating a movement, building something meaningful. That's marketing at its purest. You've grown an organic following of thousands, created engagement most brands would kill for, all without spending a dime on advertising. You've identified a need and filled it in a way that resonates emotionally. Emma wasn't sure where this was going. What I'm saying is, you're wasted here. This job isn't your passion. That letter project is. And when you're working on something you actually care about, you're brilliant. He smiled. I'm not firing you, but I am encouraging you to think about what you really want to be doing with your time. Emma left his office in a daze. Was he right? Could she actually turn the nursing home letters into something more than a side project? Could it become her life's work? That night, she pulled up her bank account, her budget spreadsheets, her carefully planned life trajectory. She had always been responsible, practical. She'd never been the type to quit a stable job to chase a dream. But she kept thinking about Grandpa Joseph's words. Your grandmother always said the key to happiness was finding the thing you were meant to do and doing it with your whole heart. Was this her thing? The decision crystallized 6 weeks later in the most unexpected way. Emma received a call from a producer at a local news station. They'd seen the nursing home letters on social media and wanted to do a story. Emma agreed, thinking it would be a small segment, maybe 2 minutes on the evening news. Instead, they sent a full crew to Harmony Hills and filmed for an entire day. They interviewed residents, Frank talking about his letters from Maria, showing the watercolor portrait her students had made of him. Ruth displaying her windowsill herb garden, reading excerpts from letters that had inspired each plant. James, usually so withdrawn, opening up about how his pen pal had helped him process decades of trauma. They interviewed volunteers via video call, the deployed soldier, the grandmother writing to honor her own grandmother's memory, the entire third-grade class that had adopted a resident. And they interviewed Emma. What made you start this? The reporter asked. Emma found herself telling the whole story, visiting Grandpa Joseph, seeing his cold lunch and unbuttoned cardigan, the woman waiting for her daughter on her birthday, the devastating realization that these vibrant, valuable people had become invisible. I couldn't unsee it, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. Once you see the loneliness, the neglect, not malicious neglect, just the neglect that comes from a system that's overwhelmed and underfunded, you can't walk away. These aren't statistics. They're not problems to be solved. They're people. They're someone's grandfather, someone's mother, someone who lived a full, complex life and deserves to be remembered as a full, complex person. The segment aired on a Friday evening. Emma watched it with her mother and a group of friends, nervous about how she'd come across on camera. The piece was beautiful, compassionate, focusing on the residents, transformations, and the power of human connection. But at the end, the reporter added something Emma hadn't expected. If you'd like to volunteer with the nursing home letters, or if your loved one's care facility would like to participate, visit thenursingHomeLetters.org. Emma Chen is building something remarkable. One letter, one connection, one remembered soul at a time. Emma's phone started buzzing before the segment even finished airing. By the next morning, the website had crashed from traffic. Her email inbox had over 1,000 messages. The Instagram post she'd made about the news segment had 50,000 likes and was being shared across other platforms. Facilities from across the country were reaching out, begging to be part of the program. Volunteers were signing up by the hundreds, then thousands. A woman from a tech company offered to rebuild the website pro bono to handle the traffic. A retired postal worker offered to help coordinate the massive increase in letters. A grant writer contacted her about securing funding. The local news segment went national when a producer from a morning show saw it and wanted to do a follow-up. That led to magazine articles, podcast interviews, even a trending hashtag #NoteInvisible. Within 3 months, the nursing home letters had expanded to 127 facilities across 18 states. Nearly 25,000 volunteers were writing to over 5,000 residents. Emma had to make a choice. She could keep trying to balance this growing movement with her marketing job, spreading herself impossibly thin and doing neither thing justice. Or she could leap, She thought about Grandpa Joseph, about how he'd spent 40 years building houses, not because it made him rich. It didn't. But because there was dignity in creating something solid, something that sheltered people, something that lasted. She thought about her grandmother Rose, who'd volunteered at the library every week for 30 years, who'd believed that small acts of service were how you built a meaningful life. She thought about the photo Nina had sent her last week. Frank, surrounded by dozens of letters from Maria and her students, framed pictures they'd sent, a jazz playlist they'd compiled for him. In the photo, Frank was laughing, truly laughing, and the caption read, "He said, I thought I was done mattering. Turns out I was just waiting for Maria." That's what Emma was building, not a charity, not a program, but proof, tangible, holdable, readable proof, that every person matters, that no one should end their days believing they're invisible. Emma gave her notice at the marketing firm. Her boss wasn't surprised. "Go change the world, Emma. Some of us make campaigns. You're making actual impact. That's rarer and more valuable." Running the nursing home letters full-time was the hardest thing Emma had ever done, and the most fulfilling. She hired a small team, 3 coordinators, a tech specialist, an outreach director. She applied for grants and was stunned when several major foundations provided funding, recognizing the program's impact on elderly mental health and social isolation. She implemented systems, better matching algorithms based on interests and personalities, training for volunteers on writing to people with dementia or severe physical limitations, partnerships with facilities to ensure letters were being delivered and read to residents who couldn't read themselves. But she also kept it personal. She still screened letters herself sometimes, still visited Harmony Hills monthly to sit with Frank and Ruth and James. She still wrote letters to her grandfather weekly, and read Walter's letters to him when she visited. And she started seeing patterns in the letters that came through the system, patterns that broke her heart and made her angry and ultimately inspired her to push for more. Volunteers would write things like, "I visited Helen today after months of writing to her. She was sitting in soiled clothes. No one had checked on her in hours." Or, "My pen pal mentioned he hasn't been outside in 6 months. 6 months. He has a wheelchair. There's a garden. Why isn't someone taking him outside?" Or, "The letter I sent 3 weeks ago was still sitting on her nightstand, unopened. She can't open her own mail. No one is helping her read them." The letters were helping. That was undeniable. But they were also revealing the scope of the crisis in elder care, the understaffing, the burnout, the systemic neglect that even the most compassionate facilities couldn't fully overcome. Emma started speaking publicly about what she was learning. She testified at state legislative hearings about elder care funding. She wrote op-eds about the loneliness epidemic. She partnered with advocacy groups pushing for better staffing ratios in nursing homes. Some facilities started dropping out of the program, places like Meadowbrook, where administrators saw Emma's advocacy as criticism. Mrs. Whitmore sent a curt email. "Given your increasingly public stance on elder care facilities, Meadowbrook feels it's best to part ways with the nursing home letters. Thank you for your service." Emma was devastated, not for herself, but for the residents at Meadowbrook, who'd been receiving letters, who'd had that lifeline severed because their facility's director cared more about reputation than resident welfare. But she used it. She wrote about it. She shared how facilities that prioritized image over care were cutting off programs that actually helped residents. And the public response was swift. Meadowbrook's social media was flooded with negative comments. Several families pulled their loved ones out and transferred them to facilities that were part of the nursing home letters network. Change was happening. Slowly, frustratingly slowly, but happening. 1 year after Emma wrote that first batch of letters in the middle of the night, the nursing home letters held its first annual celebration. They rented a community center and invited volunteers who could attend in person, set up video calls for those who couldn't, and most importantly, brought in dozens of residents from participating facilities. The room was decorated simply but beautifully. Each table had centerpieces made from letters, artfully arranged and framed. On the walls hung photos of pen pals meeting for the first time, of letters being read, of smiles that had been missing for too long. Emma stood at the front of the room, looking out at the crowd. There were volunteers of all ages, from the 10-year-old girl who wrote with her grandmother to the 95-year-old woman who wrote from her own assisted living facility. There were residents in wheelchairs, Some with oxygen tanks, some who needed help holding their heads up, but all of them present, all of them valued. And there, in the front row, was Grandpa Joseph, wearing his Navy veteran cap and the biggest smile Emma had seen in years. Next to him sat Walter, who'd flown in from Vermont just for this event, just to meet his pen pal in person. A year ago, Emma began, her voice shaking slightly, I visited my grandfather and my heart broke. I saw him sitting alone with his cold lunch and his unbuttoned cardigan, and I saw a system that had rendered him invisible. I saw dozens of people with rich histories and profound wisdom, being warehoused and forgotten. She paused, looking directly at Grandpa Joseph. I went home that night angry and heartbroken, and I wrote letters. 15 letters. Because I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe, just maybe, if someone took 5 minutes to acknowledge these people's existence, it would help. The room was completely silent, everyone listening. What I didn't understand then was that those letters weren't just about the people receiving them. They were about all of us, about recognizing our own humanity in the face of theirs, about building a society that doesn't discard people when they're no longer productive, about proving that every single life, every single story, every single person matters until the very end. Emma's voice grew stronger. Today, the nursing home letters connects 7,234 residents with 31,407 volunteers across 23 states. That's 31,407 people who've said, I see you, you matter, tell me your story. And that's 7,234 people who've been reminded that their stories are worth telling, that their lives have value, that they're not invisible. She gestured around the room. But this isn't about numbers. It's about Frank finally believing his life mattered after spending 2 years in silence. It's about Ruth planting seeds again and teaching her pen pal about gardening across oceans. It's about James finding peace with a fellow veteran who understood his pain. It's about my grandfather and Walter, who started as strangers and became brothers. The audience applauded, but Emma raised her hand. I want to be clear about something. The letters are beautiful. They're important. They're changing lives. But they're also a Band-Aid on a much larger wound. The real problem is that we've created a society where elderly people are isolated, warehoused, and forgotten, where facilities are so understaffed that residents sit in soiled clothes for hours, where it's normal for someone to go weeks without a real conversation. She took a deep breath. The letters are helping, but what we really need is systemic change. We need better funding for elder care. We need higher staff-to-resident ratios. We need to stop treating aging as something shameful to be hidden away. We need to restructure our entire society to honor and include our elders instead of discarding them. Emma's voice grew passionate. So yes, keep writing your letters. They matter desperately. But also call your legislators. Advocate for better elder care funding. Visit nursing homes and see what's really happening. Demand change. Because our elders deserve better than letters alone. They deserve a society that values them. The room erupted in applause. Several people were crying, including Emma. But the most powerful moment came next, when Frank, sweet, 89-year-old Frank, who'd been a jazz musician and had spent 2 years in silent depression, rolled his wheelchair up to the microphone. I want to say something, he said, his voice surprisingly strong. Nina rushed to help him, but he waved her off. I got this. He looked out at the crowd. 2 years ago, my wife died. My kids, they love me, but they're busy. They got lives. I understood that. But I didn't understand how lonely it would be, how invisible I'd feel. How many days I'd sit in my room and think, why am I still here? What's the point? Emma could barely breathe. Then I got a letter from a stranger. From Maria, this teacher in Ohio, who somehow cared enough to write to an old man she'd never met. She asked me about jazz. She wanted to know my stories. She treated me like I still mattered. Frank's voice broke. And suddenly, I had a reason to get up in the morning. I had someone waiting to hear from me. I had stories to tell again. He pulled out a stack of letters from his lap, dozens of them from Maria and her students. These letters saved my life. Not dramatically, not all at once. But day by day, they reminded me that I'm still here for a reason, that my stories matter, that I matter. He looked directly at Emma. Thank you. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for caring enough to do something. Thank you for reminding us we're not invisible. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the celebration, Emma sat with Grandpa Joseph and Walter, watching them laugh together like old friends. They'd been writing for months, but this was their first time meeting face to face, and the connection was immediate and profound. "Emma girl," Grandpa Joseph called her over. "Walter and I were talking. We want to help." "Help with what, Grandpa?" "With all of it. We're not dead yet," he grinned. "We can't do the physical stuff, but we can make calls, advocate, tell our stories. You need voices from inside these facilities. Let us be those voices." Walter nodded enthusiastically. "We've lived this. We know what it's like. If you want to change the system, you need people who can testify about what it's actually like to be elderly in America. We can do that." Emma felt tears welling up again. "You'd really want to do that?" "Want to?" "Emma, you gave us back our purpose. The least we can do is use it to help others." Grandpa Joseph squeezed her hand. "Your grandmother always said that receiving help without giving back creates shame, but receiving help and passing it forward creates community. Let us pass it forward." Within weeks, Emma had created an advisory board of residents. Frank, Ruth, James, Grandpa Joseph, Walter, and a dozen others. They consulted on policy recommendations, shared their experiences with legislators, and became the heart of the nursing home letters advocacy work. Their voices carried weight that Emma's never could. When Frank testified before a state legislative committee about the loneliness that had nearly killed him, about how a simple letter program had saved his life, politicians listened. When Ruth spoke to a local news crew about going weeks without meaningful conversation before her pen pal, viewers were moved. The residents weren't just benefiting from the program anymore. They were shaping it, leading it, owning it. And that's when Emma knew she'd done it right. 2 years later, Emma sat in her small office, technically a converted bedroom in her apartment, but it served as headquarters for the nursing home letters. Her walls were covered with letters, photos, and a large map of the United States, with pins marking every participating facility. The program had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. Over 400 facilities across 48 states, nearly 100,000 volunteers, more than 20,000 residents receiving regular letters. But more than that, things were actually changing. 3 states had passed legislation increasing elder care funding, citing testimony from Frank and other residents. Several major nursing home chains had implemented new policies requiring regular one-on-one time between staff and residents. A documentary about the nursing home letters had aired on Netflix, bringing even more attention to elder loneliness. Emma's phone rang. It was Nina from Harmony Hills. "Emma, I wanted you to be the first to know. Frank passed away last night, peacefully, in his sleep." Emma's heart clenched. "Oh, Nina." "It's okay." "Well, it's sad, but it's okay. He was ready." "But Emma, you should know. When we went into his room this morning, he was holding his letters. All of them, wrapped in a ribbon. And there was a note on top." "What did it say?" Nina's voice was thick with tears. "It said, 'Thank you for reminding me that my life meant something. Thank you for the jazz, the stories, and most of all, for seeing me. Love, Frank.'" It was addressed to Maria and her students. Emma sat down heavily, tears streaming down her face. "There's more," Nina continued. "Frank's family wants to donate to the nursing home letters in his name. But also, they want to know if you'd speak at his funeral. They said you gave him back his last years. They said he died happy because someone cared." Emma agreed, of course. At Frank's funeral, she spoke about the power of being seen, about how a simple letter from a stranger had reminded a lonely man that his story mattered. She spoke about Frank's resilience, his wisdom, his terrible jokes that Walter still shared in his honor. And she spoke about how Frank had taught her something profound. We're all going to age, we're all going to need care eventually. The question is, what kind of world do we want to grow old in? One that discards us when we're no longer useful? Or one that honors us, celebrates us, and recognizes that our value doesn't diminish with age? After the funeral, Maria, Frank's pen pal, the teacher from Ohio, approached Emma. She'd flown in with 3 of her students, teenagers who'd been writing to Frank. "We want to start a program at our school," Maria said. "A class where students are matched with nursing home residents as part of their curriculum. Not just for volunteer hours, but as actual coursework, learning about history, about life, about aging with dignity. Would you help us?" Within a year, 17 schools had implemented similar programs, with students earning credit for their correspondence with elderly pen pals. The students weren't just learning history from textbooks anymore. They were learning it from people who'd lived it. 3 years after that first night of letters, Emma stood in a conference room in Washington, D.C., about to testify before a congressional committee about elder care reform. The nursing home letters had given her a platform, and she was going to use it. Grandpa Joseph sat in the front row, now 87 years old, frailer than he'd been, but still sharp, still engaged. Walter sat beside him. Ruth, who'd flown in from her facility with her daughter's help. James, who'd found peace through his letters and wanted to advocate for other veterans. Emma's testimony was simple but powerful. She spoke about the loneliness epidemic, about the understaffing crisis in nursing homes, about how a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable. But mostly, she spoke about letters, about Frank, who died holding his, about Ruth's windowsill garden that had grown into a facility-wide greenhouse project, about James, who'd processed 50 years of trauma through correspondence with a fellow veteran, about her grandfather, who'd found renewed purpose through writing to Walter. These letters are powerful, Emma concluded. They're changing lives, healing wounds, restoring dignity, but they're also revealing a crisis we can no longer ignore. Elderly Americans are languishing in facilities that are understaffed and underfunded. They're sitting in rooms for hours without human contact. They're forgotten. She leaned forward, her voice growing stronger. The nursing home letters isn't the solution. It's a symptom of a much larger problem that we've failed our elders. The real solution is systemic change, better funding, higher staff ratios, cultural shifts that honor aging instead of fearing it. The letters are beautiful, but they're not enough. We need to do better. Our elders deserve better, and someday when we're old, we're going to want better too. The committee listened. Some took notes. Several seemed moved. Emma didn't know if her testimony would lead to immediate change. Systemic problems didn't have quick fixes. But she knew she'd done what she set out to do that night 3 years ago, sitting in her apartment at 2:47 a.m., heartbroken and angry, writing letters to strangers. She'd seen them, she'd reminded them they mattered, and she'd inspired hundreds of thousands of others to do the same. 5 years later, Emma sat on a bench outside Harmony Hills, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. She'd just finished a meeting with Nina and the facility director about expanding their programs, not just letters anymore, but intergenerational activities, art therapy, a resident-led storytelling initiative. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Dad's asking for you. Can you come by tomorrow?" Grandpa Joseph was 89 now, and though his body was failing, his mind remained sharp. He still lived at Meadowbrook, the same facility that had once neglected him, but that had undergone significant changes after the public scrutiny the nursing home letters had brought. New management, better staffing, renewed focus on resident dignity. It wasn't perfect. No facility was. But it was better. Tomorrow, Emma would visit. She'd read him Walter's latest letter, help him compose a response, maybe take him outside to sit in the sun. She'd tell him about the new legislation that had just passed in California, increasing eldercare funding. She'd show him the letters that still arrived by the hundreds from volunteers around the world. But tonight, she sat on this bench and let herself feel the weight and wonder of what had happened. One broken heart. One grandfather with a cold lunch. One night of desperate, angry letter writing. And from that, a movement. A community. Hundreds of thousands of connections between people who'd been invisible and people who chose to see them. Emma pulled out her phone and opened Instagram. She'd posted less frequently as the work had grown, but tonight felt significant somehow. She took a photo of the sunset, then typed, 5 years ago tonight, I wrote 15 letters to strangers in nursing homes because my heart was broken and I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe, just maybe, reminding them they mattered would help. Today, the nursing home letters has facilitated over 2 million pieces of correspondence between 100,000 plus volunteers and 50,000 plus elderly residents across the country. We've testified before Congress. We've changed legislation in 12 states. We've created intergenerational programs in hundreds of schools. But more than that, we've reminded people that aging doesn't diminish worth, that our elders have wisdom, stories, and value until their very last day. That being forgotten is not an inevitable part of growing old. It's a choice we as a society make, and we can choose differently. Frank is gone now, but his story lives on. Ruth still tends her garden. James found peace. My grandfather still writes to Walter every week. They're not invisible. They never were. They just needed someone to look. Thank you to every volunteer who's ever written a letter. Thank you to every facility that welcomed us in. Thank you to every elder who trusted us with their stories. But mostly, thank you to Grandpa Joseph, whose cold lunch and unbuttoned cardigan broke my heart open and showed me what I was meant to do with my life. This is what love looks like. Seeing people, remembering them, telling them they matter. Every single day, until the very end. Hashtag the nursing home letters. Hashtag not invisible. Hashtag older love. Hashtag very story matters. She posted it and set her phone aside, watching the last light fade from the sky. Inside Harmony Hills, lights were coming on in windows. Behind each one, a person. Someone with a lifetime of experiences. Someone who'd loved and lost. Someone who deserved to end their days knowing they mattered. And somewhere, right now, a volunteer was writing a letter, choosing to see, choosing to care, choosing to remind someone, you're not invisible, your story matters, you matter. Emma smiled. This was her grandfather's legacy, her grandmother's too, but it was also hers. And it was beautiful.